this is Lady Boulay, and welcome back to Black American Lineage. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to this channel, for your thumbs up and your comments. Thank you for all you do to support this channel. On October 31st, 2010, the musical The Scottsboro Boys premiered on Broadway in New York City, and its run continued until December 12th, 2010. Directed and choreographed by Susan Stroman, this powerful production brought to life the tragic story of the Scottsboro Boys' trial. The show on Broadway was most likely a minstrel show, written, directed, and choreographed by these people right here. I'm not going to assume anything. I'm not going to assume that you've heard of the Scottsboro Boys. But these are the Scottsboro Boys, and I can assure you that what happened to them was not something to laugh, clap, sing, or dance a jig about. This is their story. On March 25th, 1931, 24 people were hoboing on a freight train traveling between Chattanooga and Memphis, Tennessee. The hobos were an equal mix of blacks and whites. Hoboing is riding on the outside of a freight train, whether on top of the train, riding between cars, or holding on side of a moving train. It is very dangerous, but it was a way of traveling, a cheap way of traveling in 1931. A group of white teenage boys saw 18-year-old Hayward Patterson on the train and attempted to push him off, claiming that it was a white man's train. A group of whites then gathered rocks and attempted to force all of the black teenagers from the train. Patterson and the other black teenagers were able to ward off the group. The humiliated white teenagers jumped or were forced off the train and reported to the city sheriff that they had been attacked by a group of black teenage boys. The sheriff deputized a posse, stopped and searched the train at Paint Rock, Alabama, and arrested the black teenage boys. 2 young white women were also taken to jail, where they accused the arrested black teenage boys of, you know what, rape. 2 young white women. Okay. The case was first heard in Scottsboro, Alabama, in 3 rushed trials in which the defendants received oral legal representation. All but 13-year-old Roy Wright were convicted of rape and sentenced to death, which was the common sentence in Alabama at the time for black men convicted of raping white females, even though there was no medical evidence indicating that that had taken place. The doctor examined these 2 women and said there was no sign that they had been violated. There were 9 of them, and 8 of them were sentenced to death, and the 13-year-old was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And this was legal in the state of Alabama in 1931. And when you hear these so-called conservatives talking about American values and Christian values, and they want things back the way they used to be, this is what they're talking about. So you've got 9 teenagers in jail in Alabama sentenced to death over something they did not do. Fortunately, by this time, black people knew how to read and write. You had people like Ida B. Wells out there advocating for black people and others. Even the NAACP was active at this time, but it was the Communist Party of the United States of America that came to these young men's rescue. They appealed it to the Alabama Supreme Court and granted the 13-year-old a new trial because he was a minor. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama dissented, ruling that the defendants had been denied an impartial jury fair trial, fair sentencing, and effective counseling. While waiting for their trials, 8 of the 9 defendants were held in Kilby Prison. The cases were twice appealed to the United States Supreme Court, which led to landmark decisions on the conduct of trials in Powell versus Alabama. The United States Supreme Court ordered new trials. I want to point out right here that the 14th Amendment of the United States had granted Black Americans due process under the law. They had not received due process, did not have decent legal representation, were not tried by a jury of their peers, and there was no evidence that they had committed a crime, yet they were sentenced to death. The case went to the United States Supreme Court on October 10, 1932, amidst tight security. Their communist defense attorney argued that those young men had been denied due process, first, due to the mob atmosphere, and second, because of the poor performance of their attorneys at trial. They didn't even try to defend those young men. And last, he argued that African Americans were systematically excluded from jury duty, contrary to the rights that had been granted them by the 14th Amendment. In a landmark decision, the United States Supreme Court reversed the convictions on the ground that the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution guarantees the effective assistance of a counsel at a criminal trial. In an opinion written by Judge Justice George Sutherland, the court found the defendants had been denied effective counsel. Okay? So let's see what happens. So they moved the trial from Scottsboro to Decatur, Alabama, which is no better. But by now, this had become a celebrity trial. And at the new trial, there were 100 reporters. And that's saying something for 1931 in Alabama. So this was a long, drawn-out process. But what ended up happening was that they were not put to death, but they were sentenced to prison. Some of them were given 99 years in prison for something they didn't do. So this brings us back to reparations. Because they were charged as teenagers, they were denied the right to work, the right to education, the right to pursue happiness. They were denied their rights as American citizens. These are the kinds of things I'm saying should go into a reparations package. So this was a black eye for the state of Alabama. Surprise, surprise. But eventually they all got away. 4 of them were pardoned because they didn't have any business being arrested in the first place. Some of them escaped. One escaped to Michigan. Michigan would not extradite him back to Alabama. One of them was found in Brooklyn, and they wouldn't extradite him back either. The rest of them were paroled or escaped, and they never got up with them. But if it had not been for the Communist Party, they almost certainly would have been put to death. The Communist Party in Alabama was like fighting words with white people. I never understood why they hated the Communist Party so much, because they didn't know any communists, for real. They really didn't. I did not know for some time that it went back to the Scottsboro Boys, and the Communist Party prevented them from killing those young men because they had beat up those white boys, because really that's what it came down to. So 80 years later, the state of Alabama pardoned the Scottsboro Boys in that rape case. In 2013, Governor Bentley of Alabama, who eventually went out of office in disgrace himself, said, "Today the Scottsboro Boys have finally received justice." The parole board unanimously approved a posthumous pardon for Haywood Patterson, Charlie Weems, and Andy Wright, the 3 black men who weren't pardoned in the 1931 rape case. They should have been apologizing to those young men or to their families and paying them restitution for what they had done to those young men. And they think they did something big. by pardoning them. You're going to pardon somebody for what they didn't do instead of apologizing to them and paying them for what you did wrong. I cannot imagine the heartache that those families felt in 1931 through 1937 as this went on. Your child, your teenage son, in jail could lose his life over some BS by some white women who they say were prostitutes anyway. I repeat myself for emphasis. This needs to be added. These sorts of things should be added in the reparations claim. So somebody thought it was a good idea to make this into a musical, but make it into something fun and entertaining, and you can get black people to cooperate in their own tragedy, which I think is just astounding. So when we see something like this, we can only shake our heads. Fortunately, this play only lasted for 2 months. Somebody realized that this was not appropriate. The Scottsboro Boys tragedy is not a musical, it's not a comedy, it's not a shucking and jiving minstrel show, it's a tragedy. Okay, y'all, let me know what you think about this. Thank you for listening, thank you for your support, and as always, have a great day.